you very much. Yes, my name is Eli Thomssen, the President and CEO of of Adlore, and we're introducing Adlore, which is a new device to both treat and monitor diabetic foot ulcers. These will happen generally on the bottom of the foot, either in the plantar area or the toes. It starts with a callus and then develops into a wound as depicted in those middle pictures. On the right-hand side is a picture of one of the actual patients we had in one of our studies, and I'll show you the results after 4 weeks in a future slide. And this problem is caused by vascular and neuropathic problems. It also has a high mortality and cost. It compares to cancer. For example, on the left-hand side of the pink is breast cancer. Third bar graph in is diabetic foot ulcers. They can be caused by, any diabetic that has diabetes can develop these ulcers. In fact, about 12% will, 40% recur within a year, 65% within 5 years. Annual treatment costs, depending upon the areas, between $13,000 and $17,000. There are 130,000 amputations, usually starts with a toe in the United States, and the cost to the Medicare industry, or the medical industry, is about $11 billion. So one of the partners is Dr. Daryl Lawson. He got his master's degree at USC and then practiced for 10 years in Reno. And a lot of the patients he was seeing had wounds that weren't healing and decided he wanted to spend time finding out how you can improve these healing rates. So he got his doctorate at Loma Linda, worked with Dr. Petrosky. And what they determined is that the combination of heat and electrical stimulation are synergistic and will improve blood perfusion. They're improving healing rates. And the research that they did, they had healing rates up to 70% compared to 25% for the standard of care. And this data has been published in 9 different peer-reviewed journals. So we formed the company to commercialize this technology. And where we're focused, when you look at the standard of care, is number 5. They'll use a number of products, antibiotics, dressings, what have you, but they'll always put them into a boot to offload the weight. And it's either a total cast or a boot that I've shown there on the bottom. So what we're doing is building an improved version of this walkable boot. And it starts with 3 different sizes for a treatment insole. And the electrodes are printed, and we have a total of 8 of them. And when it goes on the bottom of the foot, we will activate those that are in the closest proximity to the wound. And what we found in the research is that by using 4 electrodes, you get about 3x the blood perfusion you do when you use 2. And as I mentioned, that when you add heat, it's synergistic with the electrical stimulation. And part of the rationale is that these people are vasoconstricted. And once you apply the heat and the electrical stimulation, you get nitric oxide released into the smooth muscle to reduce the inflammation, thereby improve circulation. When they're not being treated, we'll have a custom-made insole that will go on the bottom of the foot, so it can be used as a walkable device. On the left-hand side, it just demonstrates all the components that we have. The heat will actually be administered from just below the knee all the way to the tip of the toe. Another important feature is Wi-Fi, so that we can communicate information back to the patient as well as to the clinic. So we do have remote patient monitoring. Then the next boot shows it will be a wearable device, and then the finished product will be on the right-hand side. These are the components that we'll have in the boot: the electrodes, the sensors. And we'll have an SpO2 sensor to measure blood perfusion, a temperature sensor to determine whether or not there's an infection present, and then compliance. And when we talk to clinicians, this is the one they really jump on, because these people aren't compliant. The recommendation is an hour per day, 7 days a week. If they're only doing it 10 minutes, there'll be a message going back to the patient as well as to the clinic. We've had 2 US patents issued, and we filed PCT, and they're going through the normal routine right now. We're working with technical engineering, and they've laid out a 4-phase development project. And where we are right now is on phase 1. We have developed the prototype, and we're raising funding to do the other 3 phases and then have a product that we'll take into clinical development, also the product that will eventually go to market. This is a prototype, contains modified components, but it'll have all the components we'll have in the final product. And we have done a small pilot study using heat plus electrical stimulation for diabetics as well as non-diabetics. And an important feature is even after you discontinue treatment, there's a carryover effect where you continue to have improved circulation. And this is a study that was done in North Carolina. The picture on the left is the picture that we had, I showed you on the second slide. And then 4 weeks later, the closure on that particular wound. And 4 weeks is kind of a predictor of whether or not a particular therapy is working. If it is, continue until you have total wound healing. If not, reassess your treatment. And on this particular study, the average closure rate was 54% compared to 24% for the controls. We do have competition, but the competitors all have these offloading boot. Some attempt to do some of the things that we're doing. The one on the right, for example, the vascular boot, they use compression to try and improve circulation. It doesn't work nearly as well as what the electrical stimulation and heat do. So we have all the components that are necessary that the other competitors do not have. In terms of the market, it's about $11.5 billion market. We estimate the market for this boot is about $2 billion. And the clinicians that treat diabetic foot ulcers, a lot of times the family practitioner is the first one to see them, but they immediately refer them out to a podiatrist, a wound clinic, endocrinologist for treatment. Where we are in terms of development, we have raised $500,000, plus we have one grant, and that money was used to develop the prototype, conduct the pilot study, as well as fund intellectual property. We're doing a seed round right now to complete the development work for the boot, and that will be a boot that we'll take into the clinical study, and then we'll do another series to complete the clinical study, to obtain a 510(k) approval, and then the plan is to sell the company. In terms of the management team, our president and CEO, I was formerly with Pharmacia and Upjohn, which is now Pfizer, and then started a group called Apjohn to start life science companies. I've been involved with starting 5, had 4 exits, 1 failure. Steve Nemes is a CFO. He's had both startup and Fortune 500 experience. And then the 2 patent holders, one is Darrell Lawson, who is on the faculty at Western Michigan University treating wounds right now, and Chris Arena, who has a PhD in biomedical engineering. We're a virtual company, but with this skill set, we can design the type of boot that's going to be necessary. In terms of a summary, a lot of the risk has been mitigated because we're using components that are already being used for other products. Diabetic foot ulcers are a problem, they're expensive. Anytime you can reduce healthcare costs, you're meeting an unmet need, and we feel we're efficient in terms of utilization of capital. The other thing I'll mention I should include on this is that in terms of adoption, they're already putting them into a boot. It's just a matter of convincing the wound care people to put them into a boot with these other components. As I mentioned, we want to sell the company once we obtain the 510(k) approval. I've identified potential acquirers. These are companies that are currently acquiring businesses. We have had conversations with 3 of them, primarily to keep them aware of what we're doing, so at the appropriate time we can go back to them and they're familiar with the product. That's the Adlore story. Thank you very much.